Welcome, everybody. I'm Charlie Rewa with NRCS. And this morning, and actually this afternoon as well, we're going to have some presentations on our NRCS's Working Lands for Wildlife effort, which is a partnership between NRCS and our science partners and private landowners to help at-risk species and landscapes they live in using farm bill tools. So we want to get started and keep on time. So without further ado, I'll introduce Andrew Olsen, our first talk on cut a tree, grow a grouse. And this advances.
Okay, sounds great.
So go for it.
All right, well, thank you everybody for being here first thing in the morning on the last day of the conference after a bunch of socials last night, so much appreciated. I want to acknowledge my co-authors. John Severson was a PhD on this project before me, and I'll be presenting analysis that includes data from his time frame as well. Jeremy Maestas with NRCS, Dave Noggle with the University of Montana, Kate Yates is a BLM biologist, and then Christian Hagen was my PhD advisor. This work was funded by a variety of folks, but I especially want to thank Conservation Effects Assessment Project and NRCS Sage-Grouse Initiative for funding the bulk of my project. So around the world, trees, native trees, are expanding their range and moving into shrub and grassland ecosystems. And this is having widespread ecological consequences. And this is a tough issue because we don't really know how to treat these invasions. They're native species, but they're kind of getting out of whack. And what we're having is that these areas that were historically treeless are undergoing these state transitions and becoming woodlands. And this isn't something that's unique to the United States, Australia, Africa, South America. This issue is all over the planet. So if we zoom in to the Great Basin and the areas where I work on sage-grouse, we're looking at a tree, western juniper. And so this green portion of this range map shows the extent of western juniper. And when you look at when did this expansion really kick off, particularly in our part of the world, what you see is that it lines up very closely with European settlement of the West. So this plot here on the left, this vertical line is at the year 1870. That's approximately when European settlers came to the Great Basin in the western United States. And this line here is year of juniper establishment at a study site, Steens Mountain, which is in eastern Oregon. And so year of establishment is basically just like the birthday of the tree. And what you can see is that the vast majority of trees started growing after European settlement. So what's the mechanism behind this? Why is this happening? The idea is that one of the primary drivers of this is alterations to historic fire regimes. And so with increased grazing, reducing fine fuels on the landscape that are needed to carry fire, and then just active fire suppression throughout much of the 20th century, we reduced the amount of fire on the landscape. And historically, fire would have periodically pushed these trees back to areas where fire didn't carry well, like rocky ridgetops and places like that. And without fire, the trees have been able to expand relatively unchecked. So this is another study site in eastern Oregon, just north of my study area. And each of these lines is an individual site. And these are fire scars from tree ring data. And so each dash represents a fire. This is the composite across all 4 sites. You can see we got a bunch of fires going all the way up until livestock introduction and European settlement in the late 1800s, and then active fire suppression in the early 1900s. And that fires basically drop off the map there. So for the sage-grouse, they are great indicators of sagebrush ecosystem health and function. They use sagebrush during every phase of their life cycle. In the wintertime, they eat 100% sagebrush, so it's critical for them. So if sage-grouse aren't doing well, it's probably a good indicator that the sagebrush ecosystem as a whole is not doing well. And so, as I'm sure all of you are aware, sage-grouse are not doing well. So when you look at the range, this is the lighter green here is historic range, and the darker green is current range, and they occupy about half of their historic range. And then when you look at LEC counts, we see this is for the Northern Great Basin Management Zone, which encompasses my study area in Oregon, that we have a 1.38% annual decrease in males per LEC up from 1965 to 2015. So how are the trees actually affecting sage-grouse? One of the great paper that came out was Brock, Mordeau, and others in 2013. And what this is percent conifer cover within a kilometer of a LEC site on your x-axis. And the y-axis is probability of LEC activity. So that's the probability that at least one male is showing up to a breeding site and displaying. And what we see here is that once you get above about 4% conifer cover around the lek site, it's very unlikely that any males are going to be showing up and displaying in those areas. Zooming into nest site selection, so this plot on the right comes from John Severson, the other PhD on this project. And what you have here is conifer cover. Once again, this is within 800 meters of nesting sites, and then relative probability of choosing a nest site there on the vertical axis. And the threshold's even lower here, around 2 or 3% cover. Very unlikely that a sage-grouse is going to choose to nest in those areas. And that's just a smattering of trees on the landscape. That's not many. And then here we have conifer clustering index on the lower left axis, and they're selecting for lower values of that. And what that means is that for a given number of trees on the landscape, a sage-grouse would prefer that all those trees are clumped together in one spot rather than spread out all over, just reinforcing the idea that they want open spaces. They don't want to be around trees. So because of these have been identified as threats, and conifer expansion is a big deal for sage-grouse, agencies are now going in and have been for a while and actively removing trees in sagebrush habitat, largely to benefit sage-grouse, but also other species as well. This map here shows recent NRCS cuts in the last few years. The blue is active management, and the larger the size of the dot, the bigger the area that was treated. This photo on the right here is a photo from my study site and gives you kind of an example of what a typical area looks like before trees are cut. The sagebrush understory is basically intact, and after going in and removing trees, you can see what it looks like. So because they're focusing on areas where the sagebrush understory is intact, those important vegetation components for sage-grouse are still there, you're basically buying instant habitat in some of these areas that may last you, 30, 60 years. So that leads to the objectives of my project. My first objective was to assess the population response of sage-grouse to landscape scale conifer removals. And then depending on what sort of dynamics I saw, to use a sensitivity analysis to figure out which vital rates were driving those changes that we're seeing. So I have a nice before-after control impact study design. I have this treatment area up here with all the gray polygons in it, and those polygons represent areas where trees were removed, and then a control area below it where, for the most part, trees have not been removed. This table here shows the cumulative hectares removed through time. So we consider 2010 and 11 as our pre-treatment years. For the most part, no trees have been removed. There's a little bit on private lands, but for the most part, nothing had been cut in the treatment area. And then the majority of treatments were completed by 2014. You can see 81%, and then a few more down through 2017. Where we are in the world here, if you look at where Nevada, California, and Oregon all meet, that's basically right where this study site is. So for our methods, so we're capturing sage-grouse using kind of standard field methods for grouse. We marked them with VHF and GPS transmitters. And so we have a whole bunch of data on sage-grouse vital rates. And then there's also let counts going on at the same time where we're counting males at these sites and getting an index of abundance. So I used a hierarchical integrated population model, or IPM, to integrate these data types. So the idea is, we could take the vital rate data from telemetry, slap it into a Leslie matrix, and get at lambda, or population growth rate. We could also take the let count data and get at lambda, or population growth rate. And the idea is to marry these two data types in a single model for a more robust and precise estimate of population growth rates in the project area. If you're interested in these models, there was a great session yesterday, a whole session on IPMs that I'm sure was recorded, and I would check it out for more technical. That's all you're going to get from me on it, though. So right into results. To get you oriented on this graph here, the gray represents our pre-treatment years, red is treatment, black is control, and on the vertical axis we have population growth rate. So a lambda of 1, which is that dashed line, is a stable population. Above 1 would be increasing, and below 1 would be decreasing. And then I got a summary of sample size here. So we had over 400 hens marked over the 8 years of this project. So at first glance, you'll notice that if you just track these two lines through time, they're basically following each other. And that's not surprising. That's actually a good thing. We want a control area that's representative of our treatment, that's experiencing the same exogenous factors like climate and precipitation that we know are big drivers of sage-grouse population dynamics. But you'll see this better on the next slide. It's starting in 2013, the treatment relative to the control starts to steadily increase. So this is that exact same data. I just subtracted it. So it's treatment minus control. And so what you have here is you can see in the pre-treatment, some years the treatment did better, some years the control did better. But then starting in 2013, you see this steady increase in the difference in growth rates. and this dashed line represents those cumulative hectares of trees that were removed you saw on that table earlier. So by 2016 and 17, we're at 11 or 12% increase in population growth rate in our treatment relative to our control. For sage-grouse, that's huge. That's not a small number. In the long term, that could have real serious implications for the population of the treatment, real positive effect. So that's very encouraging to see that the cuts seem to work, and this suggests that it's an effective way to boost sage-grouse population growth rates. So I talked about the sensitivity analysis and trying to figure out, so which of the individual vital rates actually made this happen? What were the changes at that finer scale? And what we see is that it was sort of an equal contribution across 4 vital rates that contributed to the observed dynamics. And so those are juvenile survival, so that's from fledging to first breeding, adult survival, first nest survival, and yearling survival, all sort of equally contributed to the dynamics that were observed. And what I did here in these plots, these are just looking at correlations between the difference in the vital rate between treatment and control, and then the difference in lambda, what you saw in the last plot between treatment and control. And the tighter that relationship suggests that it's more of a significant driver of the dynamics that we're seeing. So all these have a coefficient of correlation around 0.71, 0.73. I'll throw a couple others up here too. This middle lower one is second nest survival, also had a positive impact, but not quite as dramatic as the others. And I didn't find any relationship with chick survival, which was a little bit surprising, because we know chick survival is an important driver from other studies that have gone on. There were some weather events that had poor timing for our broods, and that may have sort of obscured any effect. It's also possible that just the cuts that happened benefited some of these other vital rates more. The outcome was still positive. So if you think back to that plot where I had the difference in lambda where we got to that 11, 12%, that was about 5 or 6 years after treatment started until we got a measurable effect. And so sage-grouse have a slower life history compared to other game birds. They produce fewer young, they live longer, and it's probably biologically unfeasible to see a dramatic population response from sage-grouse in just a couple years. So you need these long-term studies to really be able to capture those effects. And this has been supported by other studies too. So this one looked at just let counts on the left here, this McKenzie study, and found a 5 to 10 year lag before there were measurable increases in let counts when there was a bunch of conifer cutting going around them. And then this other study on the right here looked at actually declines in let counts as a result of energy development, and also saw a 2 to 10 year lag before having measurable effects. All right, I blew through that quickly. I'll just end with this. Once again, hammering the positive side of this. A lot of money and effort is going in across the range of sage-grouse to remove trees, and those benefits extend to other species too. Sagebrush obligate songbirds, mule deer. There's all kinds of papers that are coming out now looking at this. And to date, conifer removal is the only conservation action that's been demonstrated to increase sage-grouse population growth rates. That doesn't mean that other things don't work, but as far as what's been modeled, and we explicitly dove in and got at it, so far conifer removal is the only thing that has been shown to work. And with that, I will take any questions. Yes?
So I was just wondering about your chick survival, and is that sort of portion of the population or life stage, has that shown the same decreases due to the conifer expansion as the other life stages? I was wondering if maybe that just, it was helped a little bit less because it wasn't impacted as much by the conifer.
Yeah, so I didn't explicitly look at it in that way. There have been other studies that have shown that sage-grouse in general experience greater mortality when encountering trees, including young birds especially. So yeah, I think there's probably is a disproportionate effect on certain ages of birds. Pete Coates' lab has some cool stuff on that. So yeah, Charlie.
It's clear that conifer removal helps the birds. Do you have any feedback from the producers in your study area as to what they think about all this for their bottom line or anything else?
Yeah, so the question was, is there any feedback from producers in the area whether this is helping their bottom line and whether they like this or not? And I'll say kind of anecdotally, just interacting with them, it's viewed very positively. When you cut these trees, you tend to get a flush of grass and forbs, at least initially. And so that's great if you're raising animals that need to eat that stuff. So in general, it's viewed favorably I would say, particularly in my study area. There's some ranchers that are really on board with these NRCS programs and really supportive. So, yeah.
Building on that, was 100% of the trees cut, or did you leave occasional old growth to shade?
Yeah, so the question was, did we cut all of the trees in the polygons or were some left? So only trees that were considered post-settlement or younger, had initiated after European settlement, 1870, were cut. If trees were deemed to be older than that or old growth or pre-settlement, whatever you want to call it, those were left. Any other questions?
You got to burn a few minutes before we start the next talk.
Yeah.
We do any kind of control of what we do to control resprouting.
Yeah, so the question was about controlling resprouting. So if you go in and aren't tidy about cutting trees, they do come back. If you leave whips exposed, those few branches on the bottom. And so the BLM, the contractors that they use, and the NRCS did very clean, tidy work in this area. And they did a lot of jackpot burning where they cut the tree, pile it on top of the stump, dry it, and then burn it so that the pile burns down and kills the stump. And that does a nice job of preventing any sort of resprouting.
So this is mostly on BLM land?
Most of those polygons you saw on BLM land, but there also is quite a bit of private lands also. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, so I was thinking about what the cost per bird would be like.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can look at the video, like how much it costs to do all those
Sure.
paper cuts and what was the
Yeah, I don't have those numbers, but yeah, that would be interesting to look into. Yeah, could be figured out.
All right, maybe I'll try to get the next presentation up while you think about another question.
One more question over here.
I was just curious what phase of encroachment and
Yeah.
treatment area you're in.
So the question is what phase of encroachment. So Juniper is often looked at as phase 1, 2, or 3, depending on sort of how dense they are and their dominance with the understory. And the vast majority of removals were phase 2 and 1, and hardly any phase 3 was touched. So they sought out areas where the understory was intact, so you wouldn't have to do a crazy restoration, replanting sage-grouse and stuff to get it back. So kind of focus on the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.